Summarizing a scholarly journal article can actually be a lot trickier than you would think when you first look at it, simply because scholarly articles are written in such a very different style than a lot of the other materials that you may be used to reading. So what I would like to do in today's video is to just give you some advice on how to summarize your articles. What are things that you should put in, that you should leave out? What are some common mistakes that students frequently make when they're summarizing these articles? So the main thing to think about when you are summarizing an article is that your goal is to tell a story. That when all is said and done, you should have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Your goal is not to just go through the article and summarize paragraph by paragraph or section by section. Because if you do this, you're going to wind up, first of all, with a summary that's much longer than it needs to be. You're also going to find that information winds up being in an order that doesn't really make sense. So the way that you should approach this assignment is think about what would happen if you were just describing this article to a friend. They have never read the original and you just want to tell them, hey, here's the overall goal. Here's what the researchers did, why they did it, how they did it, what they found, and why we should care. You might not answer those questions in the exact order that I asked them. Sometimes you might start with the conclusions and then go back and say, okay, let me tell you how they got to this conclusion. Or it might be that you don't even mention the hypothesis until the very end of your summary. There's a lot of different ways to go about it, and there's not always one best way. But the key is to have a coherent narrative and not just the answer to question 1 is this, the answer to question 2 is that. So what I'm going to do in this presentation is give you some advice for different sections of an article and look at what kind of information the authors would give you and then how you would translate that into a summary. So one of the things that is often challenging is describing participants, because the authors will give you a lot of detail when they are describing their sample. So here is an example. This is a paragraph that I actually copied from my dissertation. And you can see that I have a lot of information in this summary, or in this explanation. I'm telling you what course the students took, where the school was, what year, how many were men, specific information about the racial and ethnic breakdown. But the fact is, if I just want people to know the gist of what this study is about, not all of this is important. It would be important to know that the people are college students. It's probably important to know that it was a community college, not a four-year school. Probably doesn't matter that it was in the northeastern U.S. You know, it's not like students at AACC are necessarily any different from students in Vermont or students in Texas. And it might be important to describe the demographics in general details, but you don't need the level of detail that was in the original. So here is an example of how I might summarize this if I were writing a summary. So I've told you here how many students and the gender breakdown and a rough idea of the age and racial and ethnic background. But that's it. Not a lot of details, not a lot of precise statistics. I didn't worry about which semester it was or which course they were taking, because frankly, in this case, it was just not important for knowing what this study was all about. Second thing you have to look at in your summary is key variables. One of the things to keep in mind here is that I do not want to see a sentence that says the key variables were blah, 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 blah. If you have done your summary properly, they're all just going to naturally wind up being named and described in your paper without you having to explicitly list them all in one place. But if it is any kind of variable that is not obvious, so in other words, if it's age, you don't have to define age. We all know what age means. But if it's something that your average person isn't going to know, so for example, here I've given an example about self-handicapping. I did not specifically say a key variable was self-handicapping. The implied statement is that, of course, it's a key variable because otherwise they would not have answered this questionnaire measuring it. But I have named it, I have identified it, and I have provided a brief definition. One thing you want to avoid here is do not just quote the definition from the original article. Because if you quote it right, it's not plagiarism, but it also does not tell me whether you understand what you're talking about. I want you to put the explanation in your own words so that I know that you know what they were measuring. When it comes to describing research methods, researchers will give you, and authors will give you, tons of detail, much of which is frankly not important for a brief summary. So first of all, don't worry about details of recruitment unless it was really, super unusual or really important to the goals of this study. But if they just say, oh, we got people to sign up for extra credit, whatever. We don't really care. It's not particularly important. They will often tell you steps they took to remain ethical. You do not need to describe those in your study. We can assume that this study was ethical because it would not have been allowed to be published otherwise. But what I do want you to explain for me is, how was the study set up? What did the participants actually do? Did they just walk into a room and sit down and fill out a bunch of surveys? Were they given specific instructions? Were they divided into groups? Were they asked to complete a particular task? These are the kinds of things that I need to know. How did they get their data? Now, as part of doing this, the researchers and the authors, they're going to give you a lot of information about measures. What psychologists call measures is what everybody else would call a survey or a questionnaire or whatever. What I do not need to know here, what I do need to know here is a basic summary of each measure. What were they studying? Were they studying depression, anxiety, political beliefs, whatever? And what was the general format? Was it multiple choice questions? Was it written? Was it an in-person interview? Did people rank their answers on a scale of 1 to 5? You do not need to tell me every question that was on a survey, but sometimes it is helpful to give 1 or 2 examples. So if you feel that that's going to help me better understand what this survey was all about, then it's absolutely fine to quote 1 or 2 questions as an example. What I do not need to know is the name of the measure. So, sometimes it'll just have a title like the Beck Depression Inventory. Don't need to know that. Don't need to know who designed it. I don't need the details of a rating scale. So if people rank their answers on a scale of 1 to 5, you don't have to tell me what 1 and 5 were. It's just not important here. And I don't need information about reliability and validity. So what I'd like to give you here is an example that I copied from a journal article. So this is original text from one particular article. And again, you can see here that they've got a lot of different information. They're telling you about the Work and Family Orientation Questionnaire that was designed by Helmreich and Spence and Helmreich. They're telling you what it measures, what 1 and 5 were on the 5-point scale, and then some details of the scoring and the reliability and validity. A lot of that not important in a brief summary. So if I were summarizing this information for an assignment, here is an example of what I might write. So in this one sentence, I'm telling you, or in this 2 sentences, I'm telling you that it was a questionnaire, that I'm telling you what are the 2 main variables that are being assessed on this questionnaire, and that people did this by rating how strongly they agreed with a number of statements. I didn't bother telling you that it was 1 to 5, because really 1 to 5 versus 1 to 10 really doesn't make a difference. In terms of results, keep in mind that I am assuming that you have no background in statistics. The only statistics I expect you to be able to interpret are mean, median, mode, and correlation, because those are ones that you have learned about in class. So when you are describing your results, I want more words than numbers. So you're going to tell me things like Group A scored higher than Group B. Or the researchers found that variable A was positively correlated with variable B, but I don't need a lot of numbers. Now the catch here is that this is a lot of information and you've got a page limit in your assignment. So one thing that you have to watch out for is not just what information do you put in, but also how do you write it so that it makes sense and you keep it under the page limit. So one trick that you can do here is take multiple pieces of information and combine them into one sentence. So for example, if I say, as expected, the researchers found a positive correlation between alcohol consumption and risky sexual behaviors. In one sentence, I am telling you their hypothesis and their results, and I'm identifying two of the key variables, all in one sentence. Here's a second example where in one sentence I'm telling you who the participants were, and I'm identifying two of the key variables, and I'm telling you that they used the survey method. Okay, so just because this information might be scattered throughout the article doesn't mean you can't put it together when you are writing your summary. What I want to finish with here is just a couple of style tips. So first of all, don't just keep saying the researchers did this, the researchers did that. It just gets really old. Okay, so it's hard, it takes practice, but you have to look for ways to vary your sentence structure just because it keeps your paper more interesting and more professional sounding. Second, as I mentioned before, avoid direct quotes. The only exception is if you are quoting maybe like questions from a survey, or if the participants were given very, very specific instructions. But otherwise, when you use a direct quote, even if you are citing it correctly, so it's not plagiarism, but it doesn't show me that you understand what's going on. I would rather see you use your own words, which might be a little bit less elegant than what they had in the article, but at least now I know that you understand what you're talking about. I already said this, but do not present information in the exact order that it was in the article or in the exact order that I asked questions in the instructions. And you do not need to cite the authors in your summary. So that's different from standard APA style. Normally you would have to keep citing them over and over again, but for purposes of this assignment, I am willing to stipulate that you are clearly not claiming to have done this research yourself, and that everything in your summary came from the one article that you have read. So hopefully this has been helpful. If you have any questions, by all means, please ask me. One thing I do want to remind you about plagiarism, actually two. One is that you do need to go back and review the information on plagiarism. Make sure you don't accidentally plagiarize, which is very easy to do. And then the second thing is to remind you that you can never be penalized for asking questions. So for example, sometimes I'll have people email me and they'll say, here's a paragraph from the original article and here's what I wrote. Can you tell me, did I plagiarize or not? I'll tell you. I have no incentive to lie to you. If you're on the right track, then now you can rest easy. If I say, it is plagiarism, at least you know and you can go fix it. But you cannot be penalized for asking a question. So good luck. Ask me if you have any questions, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.